Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Legal Tech Talk webinar on the exciting topic, buzz topic at the moment, Agentic AI, and can it become your new workplace bestie? We've got an amazing group of panelists today, and I'll let them introduce themselves very shortly. But just a bit of housekeeping before we kick off. We have a chat function here. It's an interactive webinar. Please do leave a comment. Let us know where you're tuning in from. We've got attendees from, I didn't count, but quite a few different countries around the world. We encourage you to get your questions in. Anything you want to know from our panelists, do dial into the Q&A section and get involved, ask whatever you want, and we'll try and get through to them. There's an upvote part of it, so you can upvote the questions that you really want to hear. But without further ado, Agentic AI, can it become your new workplace bestie? Before we kick off, can we introduce ourselves? So Andy, I'm gonna start with you.
Sure, thanks, Brad. Hi, everyone. I'm Andy Garford-Tull. I work for a global advertising and marketing company that's headquartered in Tokyo called Dentsu. I have a double hat role. I'm the general counsel for our creative advertising business, and I'm also the general counsel for AI transformation and governance across the group. It's lovely to be with you.
Also, LegalTechTalk hackathon winner.
Yeah, proudest accolade.
Thanks, Andy. Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you, Bradley. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here with you all today. I'm Jeremy Coleman, Vice President of Legal Research and Development at ContractPodAi. I've worked in the legal industry for a large global law firm for just about 11 years, and I've joined ContractPod in their AI team a couple months ago. So absolute pleasure. Thanks, Brad.
Yep, and thank you, Jeremy. And Tom, we'll go to you now.
Hi guys, my name is Tom Hambert. I'm a partner and chief legal officer here at Revolut. Revolut is a all-in-one finance app for your money. I joined Revolut in 2017 as a very early employee. Before that, I was at Herbert Smith Freehills Kramer as a corporate lawyer. I'm an executive committee member. I oversee and execute our group's global legal and corporate strategy, and I'm accountable for nearly 500 FTEs covering 30 plus markets, including legal, reg and government affairs, compliance, governance, investor relations, and corporate comms.
So you have loads of spare time with your hands. Well, maybe you do now with Agentic. We'll see. And just before we kick off, I've heard this term Agentic quite a lot recently, and obviously I've had to do a bit of research ahead of this webinar. But in layman's terms, what does Agentic AI mean, and how does it differ to traditional AI and legal automation? I'll start with you, Jeremy.
Yeah, sure. I think the definition has probably morphed over the last few years, but I think we're also seeing the market settle on a relatively consistent definition. I think it has three aspects. The first is that there is some agency or autonomy associated with Agentic. So an agent that's able to take decisions, whether those decisions are constrained by users or not. It also has the ability to reason or use multiple LLM pathways. And then the third is that it has the ability to use tools. And by tools, we mean it could be web search on the simple end, or it could be access to databases, the ability to read and write databases, or it could be much more complicated tasks. And you may have seen this if you've got access to things like Copilot, where it's able to actually take actions within Word or Excel or multiple other Microsoft applications. So I think it's really the ability for it to be autonomous and make autonomous decisions, and the ability to use tools, which is kind of the key definition, I think, that is broadly accepted. But I'll defer to Andy and Tom in case there's anything they want to add to that.
I think you've done a really neat job. I was just going to mention that there's a nifty handout that you kindly supplied, Jeremy, so that the audience could use it as a reference point as we kind of discuss the topics today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Do you want me to continue, Brad, just with a little level setting?
Yeah, you can do, and I'd also love to hear from an in-house perspective from Andy and Tom. How do you see agentic AI, and how's it changing the way you're doing things internally as well? Have you already started using it, agentic?
Yeah, look, we are at Revolut, and it's I guess it's useful in so far as it is when deployed appropriately and with the right guardrails, it will be able to remove up to about 95% of the work required to get to a level that is to a sufficient level of completeness that could then justify the time of a lawyer for review. And I think that's helpful and it's empowering because it enables an in-house legal team like ours that's providing a service to take on more work. And so the risk is that obviously, as Jeremy clearly defined, agentic AI is no longer a single action prompt and response. So there is the issue of actually having a compounding effect with errors and mistakes, and that then becoming and taking more time to either unravel and or being just a complete waste of time. And so we're cautious in its application, and we found that there are particularly strong use cases within, as I said before, guardrails and or parameters which make it sensible to do so. And they could be traditionally roles or tasks that were burdensome from an administrative perspective that can now be performed quickly. I mean, use case examples include high volume, low value contracts for commercial sales, procurement bases, or employment contracts, where terms typically remain consistent depending on the role, and there are sort of certain fields, including location and or local collective bargaining arrangements or employment terms that can be substituted, but you're basing the work off a fairly standardized template foundation.
Shall I provide a quick build from a Dentsu point of view?
Yes, please.
Of course. So we're about 18 months into our partnership with Harvey, and we're at that point in our adoption where we call it like assistive co-pilots. Tom just beautifully explained it as the sort of prompt generate, and Jeremy, you've touched on this already as well. And I guess it's just pointing the audience back to your handout that if they're looking through that right now, we're referring to the most, the flagship application of that era 3. So for us, that use of co-pilot, assistive co-pilot, that's table stakes. It's part of our everyday work. So our focus, quite similar to Tom's team, is that we're shifting to workflows, but we've split it a little bit. And that, just for those who are looking at the handout, that sort of fits more in the era 4. So we're looking at it through, what can we codify as custom workflows, and what should we be looking at with a view to exploring as more of a smart workflow. And so a key question for us is sort of back to basics, which task suits which type. And, similar to what Tom's just touched on, we've been guided to think about it that if it's high volume, low variance work, stable policies, you're looking at custom. Whereas if it's more dynamic, mixed content types, frequent policy changes, and need for speed and less human intervention, then you're looking more at smart. So let me give you a quick example from our house, which is comms and thought leadership. As an advertising company, we publish a lot of content, and each piece needs to be checked, against multiple guidelines, policies, IP considerations, the works. And right now we're testing a custom workflow. It's doing pretty well. It's simple, it's predictable, it's easy to audit, but there's a catch. So it treats a tweet the same way as a white paper, the same way as a product press release, when clearly those don't all pose the same risks. So we're planning to explore some semblance of a smart workflow to see if we can shift from, a checklist first type approach more to a content first approach. Imagine the AI or AI agent classifying each piece by the claims made, third-party references, sensitivity, and then dynamically determining what depth of checks are needed. So that's going to be the next phase for us.
Cheers, Andy. And Jeremy, I'm going to come back to you. How comfortable should we be already at this stage in letting AI make decisions or manage workflows without constant oversight? Like, what stage are we at?
I'm going to give the classic lawyer answer here, which is it entirely depends on what you're trying to do and the organization that you're in and the amount of regulations that apply to your organization. Yeah, the answer is simple and I think frank is it really depends, and your response to that as an organization needs to be very nuanced. We're really lucky to have two people on the call who are in the throes of it, and I'm sure they can give lots of examples of where it looks like a simple workflow, but actually the nuance is far more complicated, or I guess the considerations are far more complicated. I think that like the example that Andy was giving, where you've got kind of a smart workflow where you are relying on LLMs to do some reasoning to make some level of decisions. I was asked recently a similar question about the kind of broad concerns around autonomy, and I think the work that we are doing at ContractPod, particularly with around our new product called Agentic OS, the way I can see, or the way I'm describing this, is that actually the thinking that needs to go into the creation of agentic workflows, you have perhaps even more control now than you did when it was a lot of individuals simply sending in a query or a prompt into a model and then getting back a response. That was almost like a number of individual people working in silos and completely in isolation. But now, because you have the ability to chain together multiple interactions, and you also have the ability to put very specific constraints and rules around what each of those agents can do, you end up, I think, coming to the point where you can trust the workflow and the multiple agents working together, maybe not immediately out of the box, because I think every responsible business needs to have full supervision of that out of the gate. But you get to a position of trust pretty quickly when you can see it running and it's producing consistent outputs and it's paying attention to the constraints that you've given it. So I know that sounds a bit abstract, but you can imagine designing a particular agent, saying what it can do, what it can't do, and putting those hard rules in. That then creates trust around how those agents are working in parallel or in Storm, however you set them up.
Cheers, Jeremy. Does anyone have anything to add on that before we move over to the next topic?
Yeah, I think I agree with Jeremy. I think when we talk about agentic AI, where we actually where we are now isn't what we're talking about, what we're talking about, right? I think what we're talking about now is really good use cases of automation, and so only useful as the inputs. But where we want to get to is with agentic AI is the ability to have that trust, that validation from the AI, that the agents that have built the tools and the workflows that are then that are empowering it to make those decisions, which requires you to have quite an auditable way in which you go about ensuring that the level of quality and underneath the application of those workflows or decision trees is correct. And so we aren't there But I think what is important is that there's the thinking around how to get there. There's also the practice as to sort of how it could be applicable. And I think with those two steps, the third requirement is then having a rigorous control process in place for input to be not only auditable, but then back tested and accuracy assessed frequently, would then get us to a position where we could trust it.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree with everything said. I guess in simple terms in my head, I think about it as, you know, a lot of the capability we're seeing today, and I don't know if the audience is familiar with Choose Your Own Adventure books, but they were a hot favorite for my kids. They're a little too old for them now. I still haven't let them go, but sort of early doors of some of the, especially the assistive into custom, it is like a choose your own adventure, right? There's variability, but all the steps and outcomes are mapped out. It's just how you get there. But with Agentic, it's like writing the pages, right, as you go. And so from where we're sitting, you know, we're comfortable with the first option, you know, that more limited autonomy where it's applying playbook language, generating packs, you know, comparison packs, that sort of thing. Things that we would term like green zone activity, but anything like amber red, you know, novel clauses, unusual risk signals, policy conflicts, you know, that we still very much want a pause and for human review. And being very candid, we are not yet contemplating the type of functionality like AI contacting a counterparty or updating core systems like our CMS or procurement platforms without a named lawyer sign off. You know, to get there, we would first need to solve for questions like who's accountable if it goes wrong? How do we meet our professional obligations and data privacy requirements? And how do we protect client trust? So, you know, for us, it's about starting small and treating, you know, legal AI risk much like any other operational risk in terms of the need for clear limits, audit trails, sort of fast escalation processes when stuff inevitably goes wrong.
Starting small, but I think we need to start, right?
Yes, that is definitely the takeaway.
Thank you, guys. And just moving on to the next segment, how does AI move legal from reactive to proactive? How can legal AI help legal professionals anticipate risks and shape business strategy rather than just respond to issues and do things a bit quicker? Tom, can we kick off with you on this one?
Yeah, I think it can definitely flip the dynamic in terms of sort of being proactive for legal in-house teams as opposed to us sort of waiting and being that insurance policy or and being more reactionary with how we can service the business. I would say that, and I tell this to my real life lawyers, but we're only as valuable as we are if we're very much in lockstep with the business departments that we're providing advice for, and that we work from the stage of ideation of a new product, or from that moment where a general manager sitting anywhere in the world wants to do something. If they're comfortable to approach based on the relationships that they've developed with their in-house lawyers, and have that discussion, even if they feel like it's a half-baked idea or there's certain restrictions that might come up, then we're already winning, I think, because as an in-house team, we're capable of actually from the first stage understanding the direction of travel and why they want to achieve that. I don't think AI could ever replace that element and requirement to have that need for in-house lawyers to be working so close to the parts of the business that they're advising on. But how could it assist in making it more proactive would be in relation to leveraging the value of the data and the precedents that we're putting in through it, and the information and the knowledge that we hold already, and then in real time running well-controlled or well-defined agents against those data points. So if you've got as every organization does, a stack of contracts, and you've got playbooks that have dictated what clauses, what should be in those contracts. If you can then actually in real time start using that information to see where your level of risk exposure is and how that is trending, either based on a time basis of sort of a year or 2 years or 3 years, or it could be based on a type of contract. It could be materiality, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, based on the level of risk for the vendor. You then all of a sudden are able to proactively flag to the business where there are trends that are either going to increase your risk exposure and or where actually past requirements within the playbook or the positions that the business had taken historically are no longer valid. I mean, a classic example is like pre-COVID, I don't think there was reference to disease in the force majeure contracts in about 90% of contracts that we had, right? So there's that kind of stuff, but what I like is you can integrate, hopefully, AI agents into real-time monitoring of legal risk. And that's not just on contracts, but that's also on in terms of compliance with local regulations and legislative expectations or guidelines on your products, and start having legal act more as a warning signal, and as opposed to just when something goes wrong. That's the first point. I think to the other point is going back to where we're talking about the use of sort of populating templates and doing first reviews of standard contracts. It's the ability to identify where we are, either where there are gaps based on the fact that we could be doing something for the first time, or where there could be non-compliance in a new market. And so all of a sudden, if you started off at that ideation stage right at the beginning with the person or the business owner that you're partnering with, you're very capable. You're more capable of actually shaping the direction and the outcome, as opposed to having to then right at the end before something goes live where legal needs to sign off, you can then say, actually, no, we can't do this because of X, Y, Z. The ability to front run it and to say, actually, if this is where you want to go, then this is actually what we'll need to change. I think that's a very valuable asset for any in-house lawyer.
Thanks, Tom. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
Just couldn't agree more with everything that Tom's said. I guess the only slight difference with us is that in advertising, we live by and large on client paper. So just a build, Tom's already spoken to that market intelligence point. Well, that is amplified for us because it turns that persistent clause variance into market intel, right, in real time. And so we think there's a real potential here for us to much more easily and speedily identify patterns like new audit rights, exclusivity shifts, data localization demands, so we can adjust our pricing, delivery models, even downstream terms far more swiftly. And agree with Tom's point about risk management. I see this as it will enable us to manage risk as a portfolio, not deal by deal, bringing those aggregate exposure points to the fore, where we're off our insurance or policy guardrails. And I fully feel the comments made about products, because we feel that too, right? A real need for speed when we're doing those pre-mortems on ownership, indemnities, regulatory compliance before we go live. And my only other observation was how it may also help us link outcomes back to contract terms. I'm quite excited about that. Like, this wording led to X% credit or something along those lines much more swiftly, so we can evolve our playbooks more readily, but with evidence.
And I also think that it's going to make legal teams that embrace this and adopt to the tools where appropriate will make their lawyers that are interacting with it far more relevant in the business or the organization that they're working, because all of a sudden they're going to become not just qualified legal practitioners with a certificate that enables them to provide advice, but they're also going to be business analysts that understand all the nuances of a particular product or the or market or restrictions or desired outcomes and the flows of, for instance, in my world with payments and so that then just becomes such it's another bow, string to your bow, which I don't think lawyers necessarily were ever looked upon as having the capacity or ability to do that type of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on this, Jeremy, before I move on?
Listening to Tom and Andy, it just reminded me of some of the things that we've been talking about recently, and that, what does a kind of a full agentic network help you to enable if you can customize it the way you want to, and to take a step back into the kind of law as grandiose as possible. If you think about the context, most broadly, contracts are effectively the operating code that dictates how entities interact with one another, right? They are what facilitate businesses to go into relationships with each other, to buy and sell products and services from each other. And if you zoom out even further, it is the laws and regulations which fundamentally govern the relationship between individuals, entities like businesses, and the rules of society. So if you can, as an individual, have awareness of every change as it pertains to your area of expertise in a way that does not require you to necessarily have to be reading every single blog and constantly hitting refresh on the government websites, whichever government websites, the many potentially hundreds for Andy and Tom, both of your organizations operating in multiple jurisdictions. You just cannot, with the kind of previous technologies, maintain that level of awareness.
No.
But Agentic does now open up the possibility that you can link the 200 different legislative bodies that do govern the territories in which your company operates, to the policies that you have in your business, to the contracts that you actually use with all of your suppliers or all of your customers, and get actual updates when the law changes, or even in anticipation of when the law changes, giving your legal teams the time to actually reflect and not react and think about these things before the law comes into effect. So as a small example, I think that is the kind of, I think the analogy you used, Tom, was it's a web, effectively, where you are surrounding your individual lawyers with all of these additional capabilities that they can draw upon, which then enables them to be far more proactive in the business, far more involved in terms of providing proactive advice, because they have all of those capabilities available to them.
And just more on that, Jeremy, and Andy, you've mentioned need for speed a couple of times, I think, and we may title our next webinar that. I quite like it. But what are lawyers freed up to do and focus on when AI is taking over some of the more routine, mundane tasks? What are these high level things that they can be doing? That's open to anyone that wants to answer it.
Yeah, so I'm happy to just open up with, our businesses, like all businesses, it's client driven, right? So I think it has the potential to fundamentally change like where we spend our time, as you've just alluded to, Bradley. And so perhaps instead of being buried in some of the things that keep us very occupied right now, like turning high volume of red lines in all directions, my hope is that we'll be in the room earlier. I think Tom was talking about this earlier in terms of being there from ideation. Like we aspire for that, but we just don't have the bandwidth right now. So my hope is that that's one of the key shifts that will result, so that we can proactively engage with account teams pre-RFP, you know, using data from past deals to say, like, here's what actually moves the dial faster for clients in, you know, X sector. And that will be, like I touched on earlier, you know, managing risk at that portfolio level so that we can more effectively spot patterns, you know, gaze around the corner, and adjust the way in which we operate and the playbook by which we operate, and not just operate sort of individual contract to individual contract.
Tom, do you have any thoughts on where we start spending our time more?
Yeah, look, I think I know there's, someone shared with me they're a funds lawyer. They're using Wordsmith, and they've got this product called Blueprint, and she was like, look, I can get a loans letter, a loan letter out sort of 80% complete after a few hours. So I guess you're going to cut down on the time spent on that type of work, which we've touched on before. But I think Andy's point is more exciting, which is you're going to hopefully be able to spend your time on more proactive, valuable pieces of information as a result of it. So, you know, you're not going to like magically have 25 hours in the day now as a result of legal AI. And I think we were chatting earlier in the week, and I kind of referenced the fact that everyone thought they'd work less as a result of email being on their phone. But, you know, that wasn't, the opposite was true. So I think that we've got to be smart with the tools that we have and the output that it brings. And so if you can actually be equipped with valuable data and insights into not just the risks, but the potential exposures and the potential areas and where we could go next, or the I like to call them like the low-hanging fruit, where with respect to actually how quickly we could do certain other tasks or initiatives, be that launching new products on the back of the work performed, then that's the gain in time. That's the value. So I'd say, I guess, to summarize, it's going to hopefully become easier to prioritize based on what's valuable. And then it's also going to hopefully, well, I think it is already at a stage of removing the fairly administrative tasks that we've touched on before. I'm not sure, Jeremy, if at Contract Pod, you guys probably see it more than me, right?
I think it's both of the above. I had a wonderful conversation with the folks at World CC about, you know, broadly their philosophy about contracting, and I think it's worth kind of repeating. You know, Tim said that you know, ultimately one of his goals is to try and get legal involved earlier. Try to get rid of, you know, hopefully with some level of standardization of contracting and having people agree on principles ahead of time about what it is that we're trying to do. We're trying to enter a relationship here. We're not trying to outsmart each other with every little amendment. And if we're spending less time on the red lines, you know, and all of the other kind of little pieces, it may not give you that 25th hour in the day, but if you were to add up, and this could be actually quite a sad exercise, but if you added up all the times that we've spent copying and pasting, or, you know, editing a red line, is that valuable work? I mean, fundamentally, is that something that you want to see your law firms charging for example? Is that the kind of thing that you want to see your people spending their time on? Or would you like to see them spend another hour a day, perhaps farther up the chain with the product teams in the meeting when they're making the call on whether we should do this feature or that feature, or we should support the product this way or that way? You know, it's that 1 30-second comment could avoid so many other downstream impacts, that will then require quite significant reactive responses. So yeah, I mean, we obviously at ContractPod are focused on trying to on the small end eliminate as much of those small, tedious, repetitive tasks that lawyers find themselves doing. But then also looking much longer term at the kind of bigger things, which is the interdepartmental connectivity, where you have data in silos and you can actually then start to be thinking about really enterprise workflows. So it's both ends, but I think the starting point for a lot of organizations is, can we get, and I presume, can we get the lawyers involved earlier in the chain?
There's a popular comment there, Jeremy. I saw these hands coming on my screen. I don't know if you did. But just moving on now. So like trust and governance. What governance and accountability structures are needed or to be in place before we adopt AI agents? Andy, I don't know if this is one you want to
kick us off. So before we talk about especially autonomous agents, I'll touch on what we're governing today in terms of that assistive co-pilot, custom workflows, and soon some level of smart workflow. So for us, the governance gap, it isn't futuristic as such, it's more foundational. We need our people using AI deliberately, safely, and consistently. So we've anchored our approach in three key things. The first, purpose and guardrails. We're defining, we're constantly revisiting how we define, where AI elevates performance, where it doesn't, and that includes the human impact. If we automate SOWs, first cut red lines, NDAs, well, how do our juniors still learn through doing? So we're thinking about mentorship, review gates, so capability doesn't atrophy as we're chasing efficiency. The second is evidence and feedback loops. We track usage, we run pulse surveys, we see what's working and what behavior's changing. And when the system misses something, we log it, we share it, we do our darnest to fix it so that trust compounds. And the third is that accountability stays human. Every decision ties back to a named lawyer. Now, looking ahead to true agentic AI, systems that orchestrate and execute, governance gets harder. So we're currently working our way through questions such as, what data should an agent access? Can we adjust autonomy by risk class? Does the agent, and should the agent rather, have the authority to bind the company? Can the agent explain decisions in ways that we, as a legal and compliance function, can actually verify? And for those in the UK, this should hopefully resonate. How do we meet SRA supervision requirements without killing ROI? So the bottom line is that we're building the foundations now. Clear guardrails, strong data hygiene, measurable feedback, and named accountability, so that when, I know Jeremy says they're here, but we're not quite convinced yet. And so, welcome to be shown to the contrary. But so when execution class agents arrive, our governance should be ready to hopefully scale and adapt.
Does anyone want to continue on that regarding governance and accountability?
Go ahead, Tom.
No, I was just going to say, look, I think first principles, it's just like model validation. Like, you need good governance around any reliance on models. There needs to be a process for scrutiny, challenge, review, audit, and assurance, and all together. So like, we've got subcommittees that do this, model assurance, reporting. We've got quite hard SLAs around accuracy levels. We report quarterly on these. So I think that you just have to set the right culture with respect to scrutiny and challenge. And I really liked what Andy said, which is about ensuring individual human accountability, right? Like, so, and that will never change, because we are the ones with the certificate and with the professional obligation, and so we have to be ultimately signing off on it. And if the challenge comes, if we don't understand the output, because that we're being told as a result of it not being an audible input, or that the model isn't up to a certain rigor or of standard that's acceptable, then it becomes quite a big concern. I think I have not thought through the consequences of releasing execution agents throughout an organization with the complexity and size and scale as ours. But I think that if well focused in certain areas, there's not so much risk associated with the reliance on execution agents, but it's at certain bespoke or discrete areas, I'd say. So it's, and it has to be validly sort of assessed at that point.
Yeah. Jerry, I'm
the only thing, just quickly, Brad. The only thing I would add is that I think, we are going to see, and we're starting to see, the emergence of, and we have, I think, in the last 6 months, the emergence of some maybe I wouldn't say commercial grade, but systems that do allow for a level of programming, implication of or imposition of guardrails and rules and things like that. And I think we're just now going to start to see the release of some commercial grade systems, and it will be. And I think this is, for those of us who've been in the software world for a long time, there is a difference between commercial grade software and legal grade software. And for any of the those that are looking at software that has agentic capabilities, where there is the ability for some level of autonomy and decision making, absolutely, we need to ensure that the suppliers, us included, we talk about it all the time, that we are creating conditions within those systems that allow for escalations at the appropriate points in time until trust can be earned. The ability to impose the right level of criteria and conditions around how the decisions are made, to ensure that there's a complete audit trail. Because if we aren't able to provide, at the very minimum, a system that meets the requirements that are on par with our own professional obligations, to the reference of SRA, but or any other kind of legal professional obligations, then it's a very easy kind of, we just can't use it, right? We can't let it do what it's designed to do. That level of autonomy needs to be, scrutinized when it's appropriate, but also we need to be able to roll back and review it, and make sure, absolutely sure, that it is doing what we've asked of it. So I just wanted to, I think that's on all software providers, but in particular those who provide software that have legal elements to it.
Thanks, Jeremy. And people will see there's been some polling going on. I'll come back. I don't know if people can see the answers, but I will highlight that shortly. I've got one more question before we're going to move on to the Q&A. And I'll kick off with you again, Andy. What are the new skills or mindsets needed to define successful AI collaborative lawyers?
Yeah, I love this question, Bradley, in part because it's very much front of mind, because something that Alison Zona, our group GC, talks about constantly is the importance of a growth mindset. And that certainly sets the tone for our team, and never has it been more apt than when you're talking about the adoption of AI within a legal and compliance function. And for those who may not be particularly familiar, the growth mindset is a concept of where it's formed through the belief that capabilities develop through effort and learning. So it's that shift from, I need to be right, to I need to learn and verify. So when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about how like traditional legal training has often rewarded, who's the smartest person in the room. But I think in an era of collaborative lawyering, AI human, that it requires a real sense of intellectual humility, the willingness to say, I don't understand this yet, and let me test this output. And something that Tom picked up earlier about culture, I think is really apt, because I think culturally, for this to succeed, it's essential to have an environment where we're celebrating learning, not just outcomes. And I know there's a lot of discussion and a lot of talk about Brené Brown and the fantastic work she's done, but I think it's particularly apt here, leaning into vulnerability, because we've certainly found that when our senior lawyers in particular are really open about points of confusion, challenge, anxiety, and every sort of every complexion, that it makes it safe for everyone to be learners.
Always
Yeah.
learning.
I think that's right. Like, I think that in time, the most valuable members of an in-house legal team, I think, will be those that are able to sort of accept that the foundation requirement of a brilliant legal training and qualification is just the starting point, and it's actually understanding where the intersection of the law and where the business wants to go, how that can be assisted by AI. And so it's about appreciating that you're not going to get top marks in-house just for being able to recall the common law decision in Lord Justice Denning said with respect to a cricket ball and total. It doesn't matter. I guess what matters is that you will understand that actually, if the product or if the business or the individual you're working with wants to achieve X, they need to be protected or ensure that they've covered or addressed the law, but how can they do so in a way which won't require a reactionary mindset and the constant sort of checklist approach or the mailbox approach that legal used to be. So it's working with the business to find those in-house fixes.
Jeremy, there's a question for you at the top of the Q&A inbox.
Tara
W. I assume this is Tara Walters.
Hi, Tara. How are you doing?
She's asking, how is ContractPodAi providing explainability in its Agentic OS?
It's a great question. So depending on, essentially you're starting with a blank canvas, and you can build out any workflow that you want to. You can start with as simple as a couple of different nodes. And each node is essentially a task agent. But each path that you run the agent through is recorded. So all of you've seen probably when you run a search, a deep research in Perplexity, or you are running one of the more advanced search and reasoning in approaches in ChatGPT, you can see the chain of thought, what websites it's looking at, where it's reached, it's tried to access a document where it hasn't, that sort of thing. So it's like that but supercharged. So all the decisions that each individual agent is making. Now, if you were to surface that to the individual every time, it would just be overwhelming. But those sorts of chain of thought reasoning, decisions that are made, at least in terms of going from, I'm going to try this approach, I'm going to try that approach, or I'm constrained from doing this, I'm going to follow the instructions that have been given to me. So all of that is available, including what the responses are that come back from the model. And as it gets more complicated, then
there's a follow-up question here for Andy and Tom. No, thanks for that, Jeremy. That makes a lot of sense. But from your in-house perspectives, like, what type of explainability is necessary for you to feel comfortable?
I think, sorry, Tom, did you want to
No, you go. Please.
I think this one feels, and I'm going to be really candid, a little tricky to answer at this stage because we're not there in our adoption. You know, when we're only, as I mentioned earlier, we're only in the workflow stage, and so what we have appreciated is the fact that all the workflows expand to unpack and give full citations and steps taken by the workflow in its execution of the task at hand. And to Jeremy's point, I guess it only amplifies when you're into the realm of some level of orchestrative or autonomous activity. I guess a thing that's niggling in the back of my head is, how do we realistically manage this day to day? Because that amount of data is a lot to consume if you're really working back through it to verify. I don't have answers at this moment in time, but maybe, Bradley, this is something we can come back to. Like,
this is a future webinar topic.
Sorry?
It's a future webinar topic.
Well, I think from my perspective on just what level of explainability would be more sort of, at least we're quite rules-based. And so if you can have really articulate decision trees, then at least you can trace that back. And so then you can understand, and it does require the time to break down either the legislation or the policy or the procedure into very sort of granular detail. But then once you can understand the logic or the flow based on, you know, that decision tree based on the breaking it down of the various potential options available to you in whatever you're doing, and then sort of start seeing or training that model on it, I think it's less about needing a sort of explainable defense to an output, but more about understanding the logic behind it.
Just quickly to add, I forgot to mention to Tara's question, part of the explainability, and this is also partially cued by your comment, Tom. Part of the explainability is having a visual representation of how the decisions are flowing from one agent to the next. So if you, as the creator or the designer, understand that you've created a set of agents and each of those agents has a specific task, then you can shortcut it by saying, I know what the input was, and then now I'm looking at the output, and the output looks like it meets our requirements. And particularly when you're doing quite complex things, you can see the information flowing from agent to agent on the canvas. And you can actually see whether or not the information that's produced as an output for one is sufficient for the input for another one. And that's, you know, partially it has to be about visuals, because as it gets more complicated, you do not want it to just say, trust me, this is how it works. You want to actually see the flow from one to the next to the next.
I guess our worry, though, maybe this is a misplaced worry, is the ability to keep full sight of all those records and those activities, Jeremy, especially when there's tool integration. And that's certainly something that is niggling in the back of our mind, is like, how do you avoid like lots of siloed logs of activity so you retain that whole view? But one to solve in the future, I think.
It is. One of my favorite things that we were looking at when I first joined was LLM as a judge. So you have another LLM or another agent that's used to essentially mark the work. So yeah, that's a whole other conversation, I think.
We've got time for one more question, and it's quite a big one here. How do you see agentic AI reshaping the role of lawyers? But I want to maybe delve into maybe the role of junior lawyers, because I think that there's maybe an interesting effect there, because AI is doing some of the work that some of these junior lawyers have been doing, right? But it's just super important we keep fueling talent. So yeah, Tom, can I get your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, look, I think that I liked what Andy said earlier in relation to we need to ensure that we're not removing the option or the ability for junior lawyers to get real life training and experience and the fundamentals from the tasks that they're meant to extract from. And you can only do, and you know, similar to the idea about the discussion in relation to the getting out of your comfort zone, you do only really learn once having done it, and so you've got to be selective with respect to what you can and can't, I guess, enable your more junior team members to use AI for. We're a little bit more fortunate because being in-house, we're not hiring necessarily, although we do run an SRA endorsed trainee program all the time. We're not looking for fresh junior lawyers to come on board. So we are assessing at the onboarding process their skills and their problem thinking abilities and their past experience, and we're seeing how relevant that is to the day-to-day jobs here. But I would say that if anything, going back to the culture, with the right mindset, the use of AI actually is going to make junior lawyers a lot more capable of skilling up in certain areas, and also capable of actually getting deeper, much deeper than whatever. At least when I was a junior lawyer at HSFK, now we were expected to do, because time was money, and self-improvement and development and learning you couldn't charge that to a client. So that's the reality of it, right? So I think the positive is that you're capable of going deeper, quicker into things that may be more interesting. You're also able to remove things that actually, historically, to Jeremy's point about Control C and Control V, people used to leave the practice of law as a result of being chained to a photocopier for at a time. So I'm optimistic, and I'm excited with the ability to see a new wave of in-house lawyers coming about, fully trained and confident with the use of AI.
Yeah, I agree with all that, Tom, and certainly Jeremy, when you were talking about being very expensive copy paste junkies, that definitely chimed. And in thinking about the question, Bradley, it made me think back to when I was just newly qualified, and the memory of my first proper negotiation. I felt like I had some, and it wasn't necessarily a very positive memory, I'll be honest, because I didn't know what I was doing. It's super green, and I was thinking to myself, if you have like a negotiation agent, how wonderfully could prepare that sparring partner, and you could turbocharge your capabilities and that safety in that environment in a really dynamic way, a way that wasn't available certainly when I was younger. So that was more of a memory lane moment than anything. So that's one of my hopes for the future generations. But no doubt we're going to need new ways to train the next gen. Sorry, Tom, did I cut across you?
No, well, maybe. But I'm going to say we're coming to the very end now, so we're going to have to, unfortunately, because I think we could talk about this topic for hours, and there's so many other areas we could delve into. But for anyone that's still here listening, you'll get to meet, hopefully, everyone who's in this panel at LegalTechTalk 26 in June. They're all at our previous show. I want to thank you all individually and to ContractPodAi for sponsoring this week's webinar. We wouldn't be able to run this without you. And thanks again, and hopefully see you all soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Pleasure. Take care.
Bye-bye.